I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd push two people into a lake. But then again, I never thought my husband would be the kind of man who'd have a blonde sitting on his lap while I drove 3 hours with his favorite meal cooling in the back seat. Victoria Morrison had always prided herself on being rational, calculated, the kind of woman who read situations before reacting, who thought 3 steps ahead in every conversation, every decision. Her father used to say she had ice water in her veins, and for 35 years she'd worn that assessment like a badge of honor. But on that humid Saturday afternoon in late June, standing in the shadows of her husband's family lake house, watching a stranger's manicured hands move across Marcus's chest, Victoria felt something primal crack open inside her chest, something hot and wild that no amount of breeding or expensive education could contain. It had started as a gesture of love, a surprise. Marcus had been taking these monthly fishing trips for the past 6 months, always the second weekend of the month, always alone at the family's lake house 3 hours north of the city. He'd return Sunday evening smelling of pine and lake water, relaxed in a way their marble and chrome penthouse never quite managed to make him. Victoria had thought it was sweet, this need for solitude, for simplicity. She'd even encouraged it, telling him that successful men needed time to decompress, to step away from the pressure of running a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This weekend, though, she'd wanted to do something special. Their second wedding anniversary was approaching on Thursday, June 29th, and she'd been feeling sentimental, nostalgic for the early days when Marcus would cancel board meetings just to take her to lunch, when he'd leave handwritten notes on her pillow, when his eyes would find hers across crowded charity galas with an intensity that made her feel like the only woman in the world. Lately, he'd been distant, distracted, always on his phone, always with one more meeting, one more conference call that couldn't wait. She'd chalked it up to stress. A major development deal in Miami that was taking up most of his attention, the expansion into Phoenix he'd been planning for months. So she'd decided to surprise him. She'd spent Friday evening preparing his favorite meal with meticulous care. Lobster tails with garlic butter, each one perfectly split and brushed with a mixture she'd made from scratch, using the imported French butter he preferred, and fresh garlic she'd minced herself. Truffle mashed potatoes, using actual black truffles she'd paid $240 per ounce for at that specialty shop in the Diamond District. Chocolate lava cakes that had taken her 3 attempts to get the molten center just right. She'd packed everything in insulated containers, chosen a bottle of the Chateau Margaux he loved, the one that cost $850 and tasted like velvet and dark cherries. She'd even stopped at that little boutique on Madison Avenue and bought new lingerie, pale blue silk that matched her eyes, delicate lace that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. She'd imagined his face when she arrived, the surprise, the delight. Maybe they'd eat dinner on the deck overlooking the water, watch the sunset paint the lake in shades of amber and rose, remember why they'd fallen in love in the first place. The drive up had been pleasant. She'd left the city at 10 in the morning, taking the scenic route through rolling hills that gradually gave way to dense pine forests. The GPS had estimated 2 hours and 45 minutes, and she'd made good time, arriving just after 1 in the afternoon. The lake house sat on 5 acres of pristine waterfront property, a sprawling cedar and glass structure that Marcus's grandfather had built in 1972. It had been in the Morrison family for 3 generations, a place of summer memories and 4th of July barbecues and lazy Sunday mornings. Victoria's first indication that something was wrong came when she turned down the long gravel driveway and saw the white Mercedes convertible parked beside Marcus's black Range Rover. Her hands had tightened on the steering wheel of her silver Audi, her mind immediately racing through possibilities. Maybe one of his business partners had joined him, though that seemed unlikely. Marcus had always been adamant that these trips were solo affairs. Sacred, he'd called them. His 1 weekend a month to completely disconnect. She'd parked behind the Mercedes, noting the Florida plates, the designer sunglasses left on the dashboard, the Hermes scarf draped across the passenger seat. Expensive things. A woman's things. Her heart had started beating faster, a sick feeling blooming in her stomach that she'd tried to dismiss as paranoia. There had to be an explanation. Marcus wouldn't. He couldn't. They'd been married for 2 years, together for 3 before that. 5 years of her life, 5 years of trust and partnership and building a future together. She'd grabbed her purse, but left the food in the car. Some instinct told her to investigate first, to understand the situation before announcing her presence. The front door was unlocked, as it always was when Marcus was there. He used to joke that anyone who made it past the locked gate and 3-mile-long private road deserved whatever they could carry. The interior was exactly as she remembered. Vaulted ceilings with exposed beams, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. Furniture that managed to be both rustic and refined. Her mother-in-law Margaret's touch. Elegant, even in a vacation home. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No sound of the television Marcus usually kept on for background noise. No music. She'd walked through the great room, past the stone fireplace that dominated one wall, through the kitchen where she and Margaret had spent countless summer afternoons making jam from wild blackberries picked on the property. Everything was neat, clean. 2 wine glasses sat in the sink, lipstick staining the rim of one. A bright coral shade. Victoria didn't wear coral. She preferred classic reds, subtle pinks, never coral. Her heels had clicked against the hardwood floors as she made her way toward the back of the house. The wall of windows facing the lake showed her the deck, the one that jutted out over the water, accessible by French doors from the master bedroom. And that's when she'd seen them. Marcus sat in one of the oversized Adirondack chairs, the ones painted deep green to blend with the surrounding pines. But he wasn't alone. A woman sat on his lap, facing him, her legs straddling his waist. She had platinum blonde hair that fell in perfect waves down her back, the kind of blonde that cost $500 every 6 weeks to maintain. She wore a white bikini that left very little to the imagination, her tan flawless and even. Marcus's hands were on her waist, his fingers spanning her rib cage, and as Victoria watched, frozen in the doorway of what had once been her favorite room in the house, the woman leaned down and kissed him. Not a polite kiss, not a friendly kiss. A deep, intimate kiss that spoke of familiarity, of practice, of knowing exactly how the other person liked to be touched. Victoria felt her knees go weak, felt the room tilt sideways for a moment before her survival instincts kicked in. She stepped back from the window, pressing herself against the wall, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She needed to think, needed to understand, needed to not fall apart, not yet, not until she knew everything. She could hear them now. The French doors were open, allowing the summer breeze to drift through the house, and with it came their voices. The woman's laugh, high and tinkling like wind chimes. Marcus's deeper rumble, the one that used to make Victoria feel safe, cherished. Now it made her feel sick. "I've missed you," the woman was saying. 2 weeks feels like forever when I can't see you. I know, baby. I know. Marcus's voice was tender, in a way Victoria hadn't heard directed at her in months. But we have to be careful. The timing has to be perfect. You keep saying that. It's been 6 months, Marcus. 6 months of sneaking around, of you going home to her every Sunday night. When are you going to tell her? When do we get to stop hiding? Victoria's hand went to her mouth, pressing hard against her lips to keep any sound from escaping. 6 months. This had been going on for 6 months. Every fishing trip, every weekend he'd come home relaxed and happy, smelling of someone else's perfume that she'd been too trusting to question. "Soon," Marcus said, and Victoria could hear the smile in his voice. "I promise, Jessica. Soon. But I have to do this right. If I just spring divorce papers on her, she'll take everything. The prenup has clauses about infidelity. I need time to move assets, restructure things. You know how these things work. I'm tired of waiting. The woman, Jessica, sounded petulant now. Spoiled. I'm tired of being your secret. I want to go to restaurants with you. I want to travel with you. I want everyone to know that you're mine. You will, baby. I promise. Just give me a little more time. By the end of summer, I'll have everything arranged. I'll tell her I want a divorce. Claim we grew apart. Keep it clean. She'll walk away with the apartment and some cash, and you and I can finally be together properly. No more hiding. No more separate lives. Victoria felt something cold settle in her chest, replacing the shock and hurt with something sharper, clearer. He was planning this, strategizing her removal from his life like she was a problematic business deal that needed careful unwinding, moving assets so she couldn't claim what was rightfully hers, calculating how to discard her while keeping his fortune intact. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This wasn't a mistake born of too much wine and opportunity. This was deliberate, sustained, a betrayal so complete it took her breath away. She pulled her phone from her purse with shaking hands, opening the camera app. She stepped closer to the window, angling herself so she could see them clearly, while remaining hidden behind the curtain. She started recording, video first, capturing Marcus's hands on Jessica's body, Jessica's mouth on his neck, their casual intimacy. Then photos, dozens of them, his face clearly visible, her face clearly visible. Time-stamped and geotagged evidence. Irrefutable proof that would make any prenup clause about infidelity ironclad. What about the Miami property? Jessica was asking now. The penthouse you showed me last month? You said we could live there part of the year. It's ours, baby. Already transferred to an LLC. She'll never know it exists. I've been setting up structures for months now. Accounts in the Cayman Islands. Properties in your name. In shell companies. By the time the divorce is finalized, she'll get what the prenup allows, and nothing more. Victoria felt her jaw clench. She had helped him build that empire, had been by his side at every investor meeting, every property unveiling, every charity gala where they'd schmooze potential clients and partners. She'd given up her own career in interior design to be the perfect society wife, to support his ambitions, to create the kind of home and image that helped close deals. And this was how he repaid her, with lawyers and shell companies and a mistress who probably didn't know a balance sheet from a shopping list. Something inside her snapped, not broke exactly, more like shifted, crystallized into something hard and bright and absolutely certain. She saved the videos and photos to her cloud storage, then pocketed her phone. She looked down at her outfit. A cream silk blouse tucked into tailored navy slacks, pearl studs in her ears, her wedding ring catching the afternoon light. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd been taught from birth to be appropriate, to be controlled, to handle adversity with grace and poise. But grace and poise hadn't protected her from this, hadn't stopped her husband from spending 6 months planning her systematic removal from his life, while she made him lobster tails and bought expensive lingerie to keep their marriage exciting. Some situations didn't call for grace. Some situations called for something entirely different. Victoria walked through the French doors and out onto the deck. Her heels made sharp, distinct sounds against the wood, and both Marcus and Jessica jumped, Jessica scrambling off his lap with a small shriek. Marcus's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, fear, guilt, then something harder, defensive. Like he was already preparing his excuses, his explanations, his justifications for why this was somehow not what it looked like. Victoria. He stood up, attempting to position himself between her and Jessica, like he was protecting his mistress from his wife's potential wrath. "What are you doing here?" She almost laughed. Almost. Of all the things he could have said, that might have been the most absurd. What was she doing here? At her husband's family lake house? where she'd spent countless weekends over the past 5 years, where she'd helped his mother plant the herb garden that still flourished by the kitchen door. "I came to surprise you," she said, and was proud of how steady her voice sounded. How calm, like they were discussing dinner plans, not the complete destruction of her marriage. "It's almost our anniversary. I thought we could celebrate early. I made your favorite meal. Lobster tails with garlic butter, the ones you always say taste better than anything we can get at restaurants." Marcus had the decency to flinch. Jessica, however, looked confused. Young, Victoria realized. Much younger than Marcus's 42 years. Mid-20s, maybe. Barely older than some of the interns at Marcus's company. She had that unfinished quality some very young women have, like she hadn't quite grown into herself yet, like she was still playing dress-up in adult clothes and adult situations. "Look," Marcus started, his hands coming up in a placating gesture. "I know this looks bad, but what?" Victoria interrupted, her voice still terrifyingly calm. "But it's not what it looks like. But you can explain? But I'm overreacting?" She turned her attention to Jessica, who was trying to wrap a towel around herself, suddenly modest now that the wife had appeared. "How long have you been sleeping with my husband, Jessica?" The younger woman's eyes went wide. He said you were separated, that you were just waiting for the right time to make it official." Victoria felt a laugh bubble up in her throat, slightly hysterical. "Separated. We live together. We sleep in the same bed. We had dinner together Thursday night before he left for this trip. Does that sound separated to you?" Jessica's face went pale, her eyes darting to Marcus with dawning betrayal. "You said—" "It doesn't matter what he said," Victoria cut her off. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and wondered when she'd stopped seeing him clearly. When had the man she'd married turned into this stranger? Or had he always been this person? And she'd just been too in love, too hopeful, too naive to notice? 6 months. That's how long this has been going on. Every fishing trip, every peaceful Sunday evening when you came home relaxed and happy, you were with her. "Victoria, let's talk about this inside, privately." Marcus took a step toward her, and she took a step back. Something in her expression must have warned him off, because he stopped, his hands still raised like she was a spooked horse that might bolt. "Why? So you can lie to me more? Explain how moving our assets into shell companies and offshore accounts is actually for our benefit? Tell me how planning our divorce without my knowledge is really you being considerate of my feelings?" His face hardened. There it was, the real Marcus, the one who appeared when business deals went south, when someone challenged him, when he didn't get his way. "You were listening. I heard enough." Victoria felt something building inside her. Not sadness, not even anger, really. Something cleaner than that, purer. A kind of clarity she'd never experienced before. "I heard you plotting with your mistress about how to divorce me, while keeping your fortune intact. I heard you discuss properties I didn't know existed. I heard you promise her a future while lying to my face every single day. If you'd just let me explain—" Marcus started, but Victoria was done listening, done being reasonable, done being the appropriate, well-bred woman who handled every crisis with a stiff upper lip and perfect posture. She moved faster than either of them expected. Years of yoga and Pilates had kept her strong, kept her flexible. She crossed the few feet between them in 2 quick strides, placed both hands on Marcus's chest, and pushed with every ounce of strength she possessed. He stumbled backward, his arms windmilling, his expression shocked, and then he was falling off the deck into the lake below. The splash was immensely satisfying. Jessica screamed, backing away, but Victoria was already turning toward her. The younger woman tried to run, but the deck was only so big, and she was trapped between the house and the lake. Victoria grabbed her arm, spun her around, and with absolutely no hesitation, pushed her in after Marcus. The second splash was even better than the first. Victoria walked to the edge of the deck, looking down at both of them thrashing in the water below. The lake was deep here, 15 feet at least, and blessedly cold from underground springs. They'd both surface fine, wet, shocked, humiliated, but fine. Marcus was already treading water, his expensive polo shirt plastered to his chest, his carefully styled hair dripping into his eyes. Jessica had lost her towel and was struggling to keep her blonde head above water, while also trying to adjust her bikini top. Victoria leaned against the railing, perfectly composed, and looked down at her husband of 2 years. When she spoke, her voice carried across the water, clear and cold and absolutely certain. "Now, consider your life ruined." She didn't wait for a response, didn't need to see their reactions. She turned on her heel, walked back through the house, grabbed the insulated bag with the lobster tails and truffle potatoes and chocolate lava cakes from her car, and drove away. In her rearview mirror, she could see 2 wet figures climbing onto the dock, but she didn't slow down, didn't look back more than that once. She had plans to make, calls to schedule, a life to rebuild from the ground up, and this time, she'd do it on her own terms. The drive back to the city passed in a blur of pine trees and gathering clouds. Victoria's hands remained steady on the wheel, her breathing controlled, but her mind raced with a clarity she'd never experienced before. Every stoplight, every mile marker felt significant, like she was driving away from one version of herself and toward someone entirely different, someone stronger, someone who wouldn't be betrayed without consequences. She'd left the lake house at 2:15 in the afternoon. By the time she pulled into the underground parking garage of their building on Park Avenue, it was 5:30, and the summer sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. The penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of the building, a sprawling space of marble and chrome and floor-to-ceiling windows that Marcus had purchased 4 years ago for $8.3 million. She'd spent 6 months working with an interior designer to make it feel like a home instead of a showroom. Now, walking through the front door, she saw it differently. Not as their home, but as his. A gilded cage she'd decorated herself. Victoria set her purse and keys on the console table in the foyer, the same antique piece she'd found at an estate sale in Connecticut. She walked through the living room, past the cream leather sectional and the abstract paintings Marcus had insisted on buying from some up-and-coming artist in Chelsea. She poured herself a glass of water from the filtered tap in the kitchen, drank it standing at the counter, then poured another. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened window above the sink. Same honey-blonde hair, same hazel eyes, same delicate features. But something had shifted behind them, something fundamental. She needed to think strategically now. The element of surprise was gone. Marcus would be calling her any minute, probably as soon as he and Jessica had dried off enough to find their phones. He'd want to explain, to control the narrative, to start the damage control he was so good at in business. But Victoria had no intention of answering. Not yet. Not until she understood exactly what she was dealing with. She went to Marcus's study, the one room in the apartment she rarely entered. He'd made it clear early in their marriage that this was his space, his private domain where he handled business matters. She'd respected that boundary, never questioning it, never pushing. Now she understood why. The room was exactly as he'd left it on Friday morning. Mahogany desk with a leather chair that cost $4,000. Bookshelves lined with first editions he'd never read. A wet bar stocked with liquor that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week. She sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. Password protected, of course. She tried their anniversary. June 29th, 2022. No. Her birthday. April 17th. No. His mother's birthday. September 3rd. No. She sat back, thinking. Marcus was predictable in some ways, sentimental about specific things. She tried his grandfather's name, the one who'd built the lake house. Thomas. No. She tried the address of his first property development. No. Then she remembered something. The day they'd met, at a gallery opening in Soho. October 27th, 2019. She tried it. The laptop unlocked. Victoria felt a chill run through her. He'd set his password to the day they met, but he'd still spent 6 months planning to leave her. The contradiction was almost funny. Almost. She started with his email. Personal account first. The one he used for everything that wasn't directly business-related. She scrolled through recent messages, looking for anything from Jessica. There. Multiple email chains, going back exactly 6 months. She opened the oldest one first, dated January 15th. The messages made her stomach turn. Intimate conversations, plans to meet. Jessica thanking him for gifts, for money, for taking care of her. In one email from March, Jessica mentioned a deposit for a luxury apartment in Miami, thanking Marcus for putting down the first and last month's rent plus security deposit. $12,000 total. In another from April, she gushed about a new car he'd helped her lease. A BMW convertible, white, the same one Victoria had seen parked at the lake house. $650 a month for 3 years. Victoria opened a spreadsheet program and started taking notes. Every gift, every payment, every mention of money. She documented everything with dates and amounts, evidence, ammunition. But it was his business email that revealed the real story. Victoria had some access to Marcus's company finances by virtue of being his wife, but she'd never looked closely, never had reason to distrust him. Now, she started digging. Account statements, investment reports, property holdings, and there, buried in folders marked with innocuous names like consulting fees and development costs, she found them. Shell companies, LLCs registered in Delaware with names like Pinnacle Holdings and Coastal Investment Group, accounts in the Cayman Islands, transfers of hundreds of thousands of dollars to entities she'd never heard of. She clicked on one transfer, dated February 8th. $250,000 moved from Morrison Development Group to an LLC called Sunset Properties. She searched the company name in his email, found incorporation documents. The registered agent was Jessica Rain. Marcus's mistress wasn't just his lover. She was his financial accomplice, whether she knew it or not. Victoria kept digging, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Another LLC, this one called Phoenix Rising Investments. Registered agent listed as a law firm in Arizona. She found property records attached in another email. A condominium in Scottsdale, purchased 8 months ago for $1.2 million. Paid in cash through Phoenix Rising Investments. She searched for more mentions of Phoenix in his emails, found conversations with a realtor named Sandra, discussing showings and viewings. And there, in an email from May, a photograph. Marcus and a different woman. This one, a redhead, standing in front of a modern high-rise building. The subject line read, "Our new place." Victoria sat back in the chair, her mind reeling. Jessica wasn't the only one. There were others. Multiple women in different cities, each one set up in an apartment, each one receiving monthly payments disguised as business expenses. She found another one in the Bahamas, another in Miami, separate from Jessica. Her husband wasn't just having an affair. He was running an empire of infidelity, funded by what she strongly suspected was money that didn't entirely belong to him. She dug deeper into the financial records, following a trail of transfers and investments that made less and less sense the more she examined them. Morrison Development Group had 12 major investors. She knew that much. Wealthy individuals and family trusts who'd put money into Marcus's real estate ventures, expecting returns when properties were developed and sold. But the numbers weren't adding up. Projects that should have cost $2 million were showing expenses of $3.5 million. Development budgets inflated by 20, sometimes 30%. And where was that extra money going? Into the shell companies, into offshore accounts, into maintaining a lifestyle of multiple mistresses and secret properties. Her phone buzzed. Marcus calling. She let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again immediately. Another call. Another voicemail. Text messages started flooding in. Victoria, please, let me explain. You can't just leave like that. We need to talk. I know you're upset, but you're not thinking clearly. Call me back. Now. She turned her phone face down and kept working. In a folder marked Legal, she found copies of their prenuptial agreement. She'd signed it before the wedding, barely reading it, trusting Marcus when he said it was standard, that it protected them both. Now, she read every word. The document was actually quite favorable to her in cases of infidelity. If Marcus was proven to have committed adultery, the prenup specified she'd receive 50% of all marital assets, including his share of Morrison Development Group, plus alimony of $35,000 per month for a period equal to half the length of the marriage. They'd been married 2 years, so that meant 1 year of alimony. But 50% of everything he'd accumulated during their marriage, that was substantial. Assuming, of course, that the assets still existed and weren't hidden in shell companies registered to mistresses and offshore tax havens. Victoria pulled out her own phone, ignoring the 17 missed calls and 23 text messages from Marcus. She opened her contacts and scrolled to a name she hadn't called in over a year. Daniel Hoffman. She'd met him at a charity gala 18 months ago, back when she'd been on the board of the Metropolitan Arts Foundation. He was a divorce attorney, one of the best in the city, known for his ruthless efficiency and his ability to find hidden assets. She'd chatted with him for perhaps 20 minutes that night, mostly about an exhibit of Renaissance paintings the foundation was sponsoring. He'd given her his card, made a joke about hoping she'd never need his services. She'd kept the card anyway, filed it away in her desk drawer. Now she typed out a text message. "Mr. Hoffman, this is Victoria Morrison. We met at the Met Gala last year. I need your help. It's urgent." The response came back in less than 2 minutes. "Mrs. Morrison, I remember you. My office, Monday morning, 8 o'clock. Bring any relevant documents you have access to. Don't communicate with your husband until we've spoken. Thank you. I'll be there." Victoria spent the next 3 hours methodically going through every file on Marcus's computer, every document she could access, downloading everything to a flash drive she found in his desk drawer. Financial statements, email chains, photos she found in a hidden folder on his desktop, pictures of him with at least 4 different women in various cities. She documented everything, organized it, labeled it. By the time she finished, it was nearly 9 at night, and she had a comprehensive picture of her husband's secret life. The scale of the deception was staggering. Not just the affairs, but the money. She estimated he'd moved at least $8 million out of legitimate business accounts and into his network of shell companies over the past 18 months. Money that belonged, at least in part, to his investors. Her phone rang again. Marcus. She finally answered. "Where the hell have you been?" His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "I've been calling for hours." "I've been busy," Victoria said calmly. "Busy? You pushed me into a lake, pushed Jessica into a lake, and then just drove away. We need to talk about this, Victoria. You can't just what? Can't just react badly to discovering my husband has been cheating on me for 6 months? Can't just get upset when I overhear him planning our divorce so he can keep all his money and run off with his mistress?" There was a pause. Then, "You were listening longer than I thought." "Long enough. Tell me, Marcus, how many mistresses do you have? Just Jessica? Or are there others? The redhead in Phoenix, maybe? The brunette in Miami? The one in the Bahamas who keeps thanking you for the yacht club membership?" The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Victoria could almost hear him recalculating, reassessing, trying to figure out how much she knew. "I don't know what you think you found," he started, his voice taking on that smooth, persuasive quality he used in negotiations. "But you're misunderstanding." "I'm not misunderstanding anything. I have your emails, Marcus, your financial records, your property documents. I know about the shell companies. I know about the offshore accounts. I know you've been systematically hiding assets and siphoning money from your own company. to maintain your little empire of affairs. Those are legitimate business investments. Stop lying to me." Victoria's voice cracked for the first time, emotion breaking through her careful control. "Just stop. I'm done being lied to. I'm done being the naive wife who believes everything you tell her. I saw the receipts, Marcus. I saw the transfers. I saw the photos. I know everything." Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice was different, harder. The businessman she'd seen across negotiating tables. "What do you want?" "I want a divorce. And I want what I'm entitled to under our prenuptial agreement." "Be reasonable, Victoria. If you try to take half of everything, I'm not trying to take anything. I'm taking exactly what the prenup says I get when you commit adultery, 50% of marital assets and $35,000 a month in alimony. That's what you agreed to when you signed that document. Those assets are tied up in business ventures. You can't just liquidate. That's your problem to solve, not mine. You should have thought about that before you started sleeping with half the women on the eastern seaboard. Listen to me very carefully." Marcus's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "If you push this, if you try to make this ugly, I will make sure you don't get a dime. I have the best lawyers in the city. I will tie this up in court for years. By the time we're done, there won't be anything left to split." Victoria smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Threaten me all you want. I've already hired Daniel Hoffman. I'm meeting with him Monday morning. And Marcus, I'm not the same woman you married. I'm not going to be intimidated or manipulated or lied to anymore. You wanted to ruin my life? Congratulations, you did. But I'm going to return the favor." She hung up before he could respond. For a moment, he just sat there in the dim light of his study, her heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Then, slowly, she felt a smile spread across her face. Not a happy smile. Something fiercer. Something that felt almost like freedom. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Daniel Hoffman. I've cleared my Monday morning schedule. Come prepared to discuss everything. In the meantime, document everything you can, but don't remove any physical property from your shared residence. We need to do this by the book. Also, consider staying somewhere else for the weekend. Things may get contentious." Victoria looked around the penthouse, the home she'd spent so much time and energy creating. Every piece of furniture chosen with care, every color coordinated, every detail considered. It wasn't her home. It had never really been her home. It was Marcus's space that she'd decorated, Marcus's life that she'd supported, Marcus's dreams that she'd helped build while abandoning her own. She texted back, "I'll be staying with a friend. See you Monday at 8. She called the one person she knew would understand. Margaret Morrison, her mother-in-law. The phone rang 3 times before the older woman answered. "Victoria, darling, how lovely to hear from you. How was your surprise visit to the lake house?" Victoria took a breath. "Margaret, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." There was a pause. Then, in a quieter voice, "What happened?" "I drove up to the lake house today to surprise Marcus. When I got there, he was with another woman, a blonde named Jessica. They didn't know I was there, and I heard them talking. He's been having an affair for 6 months. And Margaret, that's not all. I've been going through his financial records. He's hiding millions of dollars in shell companies and offshore accounts. He's been taking money from his investors and using it to maintain multiple mistresses in different cities. It's not just infidelity. I think it might be fraud." The silence on the other end stretched for so long that Victoria thought the call had dropped. Then Margaret spoke, her voice carrying a weight of sadness that made Victoria's chest ache. "I was afraid of this." "You knew?" "Not specifically. But I've had my suspicions about Marcus for years. He's always been good at hiding things, even as a boy. His father was the same way. Charming on the surface, ruthless underneath. I'd hoped marriage would settle him, that having someone like you in his life would make him want to be better. I was wrong." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since leaving the lake house. I'm filing for divorce. I've already contacted an attorney. Good. You deserve better than what my son has given you. And Victoria? Whatever you need, I'm here. I mean that. He's my son, and I love him. But what he's done is inexcusable. You have my full support, even if it means testifying against him. The attorney might need witnesses, especially if the financial fraud is as extensive as I think it is. Margaret's voice was steady, certain. Even then, some things are more important than family loyalty, integrity, honesty, decency. Marcus has violated all of them. He needs to face the consequences of his choices. Victoria closed her eyes, letting the relief wash over her. Thank you. I can't tell you how much that means. Where are you staying tonight? You shouldn't be in that apartment when he gets back. I was going to get a hotel. Nonsense. Come to my place. I have plenty of room and we can talk. Really talk. You shouldn't be alone right now. Victoria gathered what she needed. Toiletries, a change of clothes, her laptop, the flash drive with all of Marcus's files. She took the wedding photo from the mantel in the living room, the one of them on the steps of the courthouse where they'd gotten married. She'd thought it was romantic at the time, eloping on a Tuesday afternoon with just 2 witnesses pulled in from the street. Now she wondered if Marcus had rushed the wedding precisely so she wouldn't have time to think, to question, to see him clearly. She left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, the platinum band with its 2-carat diamond catching the light from the recessed fixtures above. Then she walked out of the apartment and didn't look back. Margaret lived in a brownstone on the Upper East Side, a 3-story building that had been in the Morrison family for 4 generations. She answered the door herself, pulling Victoria into a tight hug before she'd even crossed the threshold. Come in, sweetheart. I've made tea. They sat in Margaret's sitting room, a cozy space filled with antiques and family photographs, and Victoria told her everything, every detail of what she'd discovered, every conversation she'd overheard, every document she'd found. Margaret listened without interrupting, her face growing more grave with each revelation. When Victoria finished, Margaret set down her teacup with a decisive click. Monday morning, after you meet with your attorney, I want you to call my accountant. His name is Robert Chen. He's forensic, specializes in tracking hidden assets and financial fraud. If Marcus has been stealing from his investors, Robert will find the proof. Won't that be expensive? Forensic accountants. I'll handle the cost. Consider it an early settlement from the divorce. Whatever Marcus has done, he did it using Morrison family resources, the reputation my late husband spent 50 years building. I won't let him destroy that legacy. And more importantly, I won't let him destroy you. Victoria felt something crack in her chest, the careful control she'd maintained all day finally breaking. She started to cry, not delicate tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal. Margaret moved to sit beside her, holding her while she cried, not offering empty platitudes or false comfort, just presence, just support. When the tears finally subsided, Victoria pulled back, wiping her eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize for having feelings. You've been betrayed by someone you trusted completely. You're allowed to fall apart. Just make sure you put yourself back together stronger than before. Victoria managed a watery smile. That's the plan. Good. Now, tomorrow is Sunday. We're going to have a proper breakfast. And then we're going to make a list. Everything you need to do, everyone you need to contact, every piece of evidence you need to gather. We're going to approach this systematically, strategically. Marcus thinks he's the smartest person in every room. We're going to show him he's wrong. That night, lying in the guest room of Margaret's brownstone, Victoria stared at the ceiling and thought about the woman she'd been that morning. The one who'd carefully prepared lobster tails and truffle mashed potatoes, who'd bought expensive lingerie, who'd driven 3 hours to surprise her husband with romantic gestures. That woman felt like a stranger now. Someone naive and trusting and ultimately dispensable in Marcus's calculation of his own happiness. But the woman she was becoming, The one who'd pushed two people into a lake and then spent the evening documenting evidence of financial fraud? The one who'd hired the best divorce attorney in the city and secured the support of her mother-in-law? That woman was someone new, someone Victoria was just starting to understand, someone who wouldn't be destroyed by betrayal, but forged by it into something harder, something unbreakable. Her phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. She didn't even read it, just turned the phone off completely and closed her eyes. Monday was coming, and with it, the real battle would begin. But for now, in this quiet room in this safe house, Victoria allowed herself to rest, to gather her strength, to prepare for war, because that's what this would be, not a divorce, a war. And Victoria Morrison intended to win. Sunday morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through the gauze curtains of Margaret's guest room. Victoria woke at 6:30, her body conditioned by years of early morning yoga classes and breakfast meetings with charity boards. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot what had happened. Then reality crashed back in with the weight of 1,000 betrayals, and she had to take several deep breaths to keep the panic at bay. She found Margaret already awake in the kitchen, wearing a silk robe and reading the Sunday Times with a cup of coffee at her elbow. The older woman looked up when Victoria entered, her sharp blue eyes assessing, cataloging the shadows under Victoria's eyes, the tension in her shoulders. "Did you sleep at all?" Margaret asked, setting down the paper. "A few hours. Enough." Victoria poured herself coffee from the French press on the counter, adding cream the way she liked it. The normalcy of the gesture felt surreal. "Sit. I'm making omelets. You need to eat." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the Sunday morning quiet of the neighborhood wrapping around them like a blanket. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice measured and calm. "I called Robert last night, my forensic accountant. He's agreed to look at whatever you've found, pro bono if necessary. He said he can start as early as Tuesday." Victoria looked up, surprised. "That's incredibly generous. Robert owes me several favors, and besides, if Marcus has been defrauding investors, this is bigger than just your divorce. This is criminal activity that could implicate the entire Morrison Development Group. I have a fiduciary responsibility to the company my husband built. I won't let Marcus destroy it with his greed and stupidity." After breakfast, they spent 3 hours in Margaret's study, going through everything Victoria had downloaded from Marcus's computer. Margaret proved to have a sharper mind for business than Victoria had ever realized. She spotted inconsistencies in the financial reports, questioned transfers that made no sense, identified patterns of behavior that suggested systematic theft rather than isolated incidents. "Look here," Margaret said, pointing to a spreadsheet showing development costs for a property in Brooklyn. "This project was budgeted at $3.2 million, but the actual expenses show $5.1 million. Where did that extra $1.9 million go?" Victoria pulled up another file, cross-referencing the dates. "Into an LLC called Harbor View Properties, registered in Delaware, registered agent listed as a law firm I've never heard of. And Harbor View Properties then made transfers to what?" Victoria clicked through several more files. "Personal accounts, purchases. There's a boat registered to Harbor View Properties. A yacht, actually. 42 feet, purchased last November for $875,000, docked in the Bahamas." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "Marcus doesn't sail. He gets seasick on the Staten Island ferry." "No, but apparently one of his mistresses loves the water. I found photos of her on the yacht in his email. Her name is Natasha. She's a model, or was trying to be. He's been paying for her apartment in Nassau, her living expenses, everything." Oh, they worked through the afternoon, building a comprehensive picture of Marcus's activities. The more they uncovered, the worse it became. Not just mistresses and hidden properties, but evidence of bid rigging on municipal contracts, kickbacks to city officials disguised as consulting fees, partnerships with construction companies that existed only on paper. Marcus hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been running a criminal enterprise masquerading as a legitimate real estate development company. By the time the sun began to set, Victoria had a migraine forming behind her eyes and a stack of evidence that would fill multiple binders. Margaret called for Thai food to be delivered, and they ate pad Thai and green curry while organizing their findings into categories: marital infidelity, hidden assets, investor fraud, potential criminal activity. "This is going to destroy him," Margaret said quietly, looking at the organized piles of documents on her dining room table. Not just the divorce, criminal charges, prison time, complete ruination of his reputation and career. Victoria felt a flicker of something that might have been guilt, but she pushed it down. "He destroyed our marriage. He stole from people who trusted him. He planned to divorce me while keeping everything he'd hidden. I didn't do this to him, Margaret. He did it to himself. I know. And he deserves whatever's coming." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed Victoria's hand. "I just want you to be prepared for how ugly this is going to get. Marcus won't go down quietly. He'll fight. He'll lie. He'll try to turn people against you. You need to be ready for that." "I am ready. I have to be." That night, Victoria took a long bath in Margaret's guest bathroom, letting the hot water ease the tension from her muscles. She thought about the past 2 years of her marriage, examining memories through this new lens of understanding. How many business trips had been affairs? How many late nights at the office had been spent with other women? How many times had he kissed her goodbye and then driven straight to someone else? She thought about the version of herself who'd existed just 48 hours ago, the woman who'd been so focused on being the perfect wife, on supporting Marcus's career, on maintaining the image of a successful, happy marriage. That woman had ignored small warning signs, dismissed her own instincts, convinced herself that everything was fine even when it clearly wasn't. She'd made herself smaller to fit into Marcus's life, had given up her own dreams and ambitions to be what he needed. Never again. Victoria got out of the bath, dried off, and looked at herself in the mirror. Same face, same body, but different eyes. Harder eyes. Eyes that had seen betrayal and survived it. Eyes that were planning retribution with cold calculation. Her phone, which she'd finally turned back on, showed 43 missed calls from Marcus and 67 text messages. She scrolled through them, watching his strategy evolve. The first messages were angry, demanding she call him back. Then they became pleading, apologetic, promising he could explain everything. Then angry again, accusing her of overreacting, of being irrational. Finally, they turned threatening. Warnings about what would happen if she didn't stop this nonsense. Reminders that he had powerful friends. Suggestions that she was making a terrible mistake. She deleted all of them without responding. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, storm clouds gathering over the city. Victoria dressed carefully in a navy suit she'd bought for a museum fundraiser last year, paired with pearl earrings and sensible heels. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw exactly what she wanted to project. Competent, controlled, professional. A woman who meant business. Daniel Hoffman's office was in Midtown, on the 37th floor of a gleaming glass tower. The reception area was all expensive leather and abstract art, designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure. Victoria gave her name to the receptionist, a polished woman in her 50s who smiled with practiced warmth. "Mr. Hoffman is expecting you. Conference room 2 down the hall on your left." Daniel Hoffman was 62 years old with silver hair and the kind of presence that dominated a room without effort. He stood when Victoria entered, extending his hand with a firm grip. "Mrs. Morrison, thank you for coming. Please, sit. Can I get you coffee? Water? Water, please." He poured from a crystal pitcher on the sideboard, then settled into the chair across from her. Between them stretched a polished conference table large enough to seat 12. He opened a leather portfolio and clicked his pen with practiced efficiency. Before we begin, I need to be clear about a few things. Everything you tell me is privileged, protected by attorney-client confidentiality. I've handled hundreds of divorces, many of them high-net-worth situations like yours. I don't shock easily, and I don't judge. My job is to get you the best possible outcome, both financially and personally. Understood? Understood. Good. Now, tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Victoria spent the next 2 hours walking him through every detail. The surprise visit to the lake house, the conversation she'd overheard, pushing Marcus and Jessica into the lake. Hoffman's lips twitched at that part, but he didn't interrupt. She told him about going through Marcus's computer, finding the evidence of multiple affairs, discovering the shell companies and hidden assets. She showed him the flash drive with all the files she'd downloaded. Hoffman plugged the drive into his laptop and began scrolling through the documents, his expression growing more focused with each file. Finally, he sat back and looked at Victoria with something like respect in his eyes. "This is exceptional work, Mrs. Morrison. Most clients come to me with suspicions and maybe a few receipts. You've built a comprehensive case. The prenuptial agreement you signed is very favorable to you in cases of infidelity. And with this evidence, proving adultery will be straightforward. What about the hidden assets? Can he claim those aren't marital property? He can try, but it won't work. Assets acquired during the marriage, regardless of whose name they're in, are generally considered marital property in New York. The fact that he tried to hide them actually works in your favor. It demonstrates intent to defraud you of your rightful share. And the investor fraud? The money he's been taking from the company?" Hoffman leaned forward, his expression serious. "That's a separate matter, and it complicates things. If there's evidence of criminal activity, we may need to involve law enforcement. That could freeze assets, delay the divorce proceedings, create a media circus. Are you prepared for that?" Victoria thought about Margaret's words, about how ugly this was going to get. "I'm prepared. If he's been stealing from people who trusted him, they deserve to know. Then I recommend we bring in a forensic accountant to verify what you've found. I work with several excellent ones. We'll need expert testimony to prove the extent of the fraud. My mother-in-law has already arranged for her accountant to examine the evidence. His name is Robert Chen. She says he specializes in this kind of investigation." Hoffman nodded approvingly. "Robert Chen is excellent, one of the best in the city. If Margaret Morrison is backing you in this, that's a significant advantage. Her reputation and connections will make it much harder for Marcus to discredit you." They spent another hour discussing strategy. Hoffman would file for divorce on grounds of adultery, citing the prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause. Simultaneously, he'd file for a restraining order preventing Marcus from transferring or hiding any additional assets. He'd request full financial disclosure, backed by subpoena power if necessary. And he'd work with Robert Chen to build a case for criminal referral to the district attorney's office. "One more thing," Hoffman said as their meeting concluded. "Your husband will almost certainly attempt to intimidate you, to make you back down. He might use mutual friends, business associates, even family members to pressure you into accepting a lesser settlement. You need to be prepared to withstand that pressure. Can you do that?" Victoria thought about the woman in the blue bikini sitting on Marcus's lap, the emails planning her systematic removal from his life, the millions of dollars hidden in accounts meant to keep her from claiming what was rightfully hers. "Yes, I can do that." "Good. I'll have the initial paperwork ready by end of day Wednesday. We'll serve him Thursday morning at his office. Maximum impact, minimum privacy. He'll be humiliated in front of his colleagues and employees." Victoria felt a small, fierce smile curve her lips. Perfect. She left Hoffman's office feeling lighter than she had in days. The path forward was clear now, documented, strategic. She wasn't just the wronged wife anymore. She was a woman with a plan, with resources, with powerful allies. Marcus thought he'd been so clever, hiding his affairs and his money. He'd underestimated her completely. That afternoon, Victoria met with Robert Chen in his office downtown. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 50, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the methodical air of someone who dealt in facts rather than opinions. "Mrs. Morrison, Margaret speaks very highly of you. I understand you've uncovered some irregularities in your husband's financial dealings." Victoria handed him a copy of the flash drive. "That's putting it mildly." Chen spent 30 minutes reviewing the files while Victoria waited, watching storm clouds gather outside his window. Finally, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "This is substantial. Multiple shell companies, offshore accounts, systematic transfer of funds from legitimate business operations into personal ventures. If even half of this is accurate, Mr. Morrison has committed fraud on a massive scale. I'm talking potential criminal charges, wire fraud, money laundering, theft by conversion, securities fraud if any of these investors were promised returns on investment. Can you prove it? With time and access to complete bank records, yes. I'll need subpoena power, which means we'll likely need to bring in law enforcement sooner rather than later. The district attorney's office has a white-collar crime division that handles cases like this. With evidence this compelling, they'll likely open an investigation. How long will that take? Months, possibly longer. But here's the good news. Once a criminal investigation is opened, the court can freeze assets to prevent your husband from hiding or transferring additional funds. That protects your interests while we build the full case." Victoria nodded slowly. "Do what you need to do. I want him to face consequences for all of it. Not just the affairs, but the theft, the fraud, all of it. Understood. I'll coordinate with Mr. Hoffman and prepare a referral to the district attorney's office. This is going to become very public, very quickly once the investigation begins. Are you prepared for media attention?" "I don't have a choice. He made his choices. Now he has to live with the consequences." That evening, Victoria returned to Margaret's brownstone to find her mother-in-law in the kitchen, making pasta from scratch, flour dusting the marble counter, a glass of red wine at her elbow. "How did it go?" Margaret asked, not looking up from rolling out dough. "Hoffman is filing Wednesday. We serve Marcus Thursday morning. And Robert is referring the financial fraud to the district attorney's office." Margaret's hands stilled on the rolling pin. "So it's really happening. It's really happening. Good." Margaret resumed rolling, her movements precise and controlled. "Marcus called me this afternoon. He wanted me to talk sense into you, to convince you to drop this nonsense and work things out privately." Victoria felt her stomach tighten. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd seen the evidence of his infidelity and his financial crimes. I told him I would testify against him if necessary. I told him that he'd disgraced the Morrison name and betrayed every principle his father stood for. And then I hung up on him." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "Margaret, I never wanted to put you in this position. You didn't put me in this position. My son did, by his choices, by his actions, by his complete lack of integrity. I raised him better than this, Victoria. I thought I did anyway. Clearly I failed somewhere. This isn't your fault. Maybe not, but I won't compound his failures by enabling them. He needs to face what he's done. And if that means testifying against my own son, then so be it. Some things are more important than blind family loyalty." They ate dinner together. Margaret's homemade pasta with a simple sauce of tomatoes and basil from her rooftop garden. They talked about inconsequential things, a book Margaret was reading, a gallery opening Victoria had been planning to attend before her life imploded, the weather, and the approaching summer heat. Normal conversation, as if Victoria's entire world wasn't crumbling and reforming into something new and uncertain. After dinner, Victoria sat in Margaret's study and did something she'd been avoiding. She opened her laptop and started researching interior design firms in the city. Before Marcus, before the marriage, Before she'd become Victoria Morrison, the society wife, she'd been Victoria Elena Hartley, a junior designer at a boutique firm in Chelsea. She'd loved that work, loved transforming spaces, loved the creative problem-solving, and the satisfaction of seeing a vision become reality. She'd given it up when she married Marcus, had convinced herself that being his wife, supporting his career, was enough fulfillment. What a lie that had been. She found her old portfolio buried in a cloud storage account she hadn't accessed in 3 years. Looking at her previous work, she felt a pang of loss for the person she'd been. Ambitious, creative, independent. That woman had disappeared gradually, piece by piece, until Victoria barely recognized herself anymore. But maybe that woman wasn't gone. Maybe she'd just been dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge again. Victoria created a new document and started writing. A business plan for her own interior design firm. She had the settlement money coming from the divorce, assuming Hoffman could deliver on his promises. She had contacts from her years of charity work, relationships with wealthy families who renovated homes the way other people changed clothes. She had Margaret's support and connections. She had everything she needed except courage. No, she had courage too. She'd found it on the deck of that lake house, had felt it solidify when she pushed Marcus into the water. That moment of rebellion, of refusing to accept betrayal quietly, had unlocked something in her, a certainty that she deserved better, that she was capable of more. She worked late into the night, crafting her vision. A small firm, maybe 3 or 4 employees to start, focused on high-end residential projects, the kind that required creativity and attention to detail. She'd call it Hartley Designs, reclaiming her maiden name, her identity separate from Marcus. She researched office space, equipment costs, insurance requirements. She made lists and timelines and projections. Around midnight, Margaret appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of chamomile tea. "You should sleep," the older woman said, setting a cup beside Victoria's laptop. "I will. Soon. I just needed to do this. To plan something forward-looking instead of dwelling on everything that's fallen apart." Margaret peered at the laptop screen. "Starting your own firm? That's ambitious. Is it crazy? Starting a business in the middle of a divorce? No. It's exactly what you should be doing. Building something that's entirely yours, that he can't touch or take or diminish. I think it's brilliant." Margaret sipped her tea, her expression thoughtful. "When you're ready to launch, I have several friends who've been complaining about their current designers. I could make some introductions." "You've already done so much." "Nonsense. I'm investing in your future, Victoria. Consider it payment for services rendered. You made my son happier than he deserved for 2 years. The least I can do is help you build a life after him." They sat together in comfortable silence, drinking tea and watching the city lights glitter through the study window. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably strategizing with his own lawyers, planning his defense, convincing himself that he was the victim in this situation. Let him. Victoria had something he didn't have anymore. She had the truth on her side. She had evidence and allies, and a growing determination to not just survive this, but to thrive. Wednesday afternoon, Hoffman called to confirm the papers were ready. Thursday morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, a process server would arrive at Morrison Development Group's headquarters on 5th Avenue and serve Marcus with divorce papers and a restraining order on his assets. Hoffman had also arranged for copies to be sent to Marcus's business partners, a legal requirement for partnerships, but also a strategic move that would ensure everyone knew what was happening. "He's going to lose his mind," Hoffman said, and Victoria could hear the satisfaction in his voice, especially when he realizes we've frozen his ability to move money. "Good," Victoria said simply. That night, she barely slept. Tomorrow, everything would become real. Tomorrow, there would be no going back, no pretending, no possibility of reconciliation. Tomorrow, Marcus would understand that she wasn't backing down, wasn't going to be intimidated, wasn't going to quietly accept betrayal. She lay in the dark of Margaret's guest room and thought about the woman she'd been just 5 days ago. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone weak and blind, and far too willing to accept less than she deserved. The woman she was becoming, though, was someone else entirely, someone harder, someone who'd been broken, and was putting herself back together with steel instead of glue. Marcus had wanted a divorce, had spent 6 months planning how to discard her while keeping his fortune intact. Well, he was going to get his divorce, just not the way he'd envisioned it. Not with him controlling the narrative and the money and the outcome. This divorce was going to be on Victoria's terms, and by the time it was over, Marcus Morrison would understand exactly what it cost to underestimate his wife. Thursday morning dawned clear and bright, the storm clouds from earlier in the week having cleared overnight. Victoria woke at 6, showered, and dressed with the care of a soldier preparing for battle. She chose a charcoal gray suit, cream silk blouse, her grandmother's pearl necklace. In the mirror, she looked polished, professional, unshakable. Exactly the image she wanted to project. Margaret was already in the kitchen, coffee brewing, the morning paper spread across the counter. She looked up when Victoria entered, assessed her with those sharp blue eyes. "Ready?" Margaret asked simply. "Ready." They drank coffee in silence, both women understanding that today marked a point of no return. At 8:45, Victoria's phone rang. Hoffman's office. "Mrs. Morrison, the process server is in position. He'll approach Mr. Morrison at 9 o'clock as he arrives at his office. Are you somewhere safe?" "I'm at my mother-in-law's home. I'm fine." "Good. I'll call you after service is complete. In the meantime, I've sent copies of the filing to the business partners as required. Expect reaction from them as well." Victoria hung up and stared at her phone, watching the minutes tick by. 9 o'clock, 9:03, 9:07. Finally, at 9:12, Hoffman called back. "It's done. He's been served." The process server said Mr. Morrison was entering the building with 2 colleagues when he was approached. He tried to refuse the papers initially, but service was completed. "I expect you'll be hearing from him shortly." "Thank you, Daniel." She didn't have to wait long. At 9:17, her phone exploded with calls. Marcus, over and over. She let them all go to voicemail. Then calls from numbers she didn't recognize. His business partners, probably, or his lawyers. She ignored those too. Text messages flooded in, Marcus's messages growing increasingly frantic and angry. "What the hell have you done? You can't freeze my accounts. I have business obligations. This is insane. You're going to destroy everything we built. Call me back right now. You're making the biggest mistake of your life." Victoria turned her phone face down and poured herself another cup of coffee. Let him panic. Let him scramble. Let him feel one fraction of the fear and uncertainty and betrayal she'd felt standing on that deck watching him with another woman. By 10 o'clock, the situation had escalated. Margaret's phone rang, her assistant calling from the Morrison Development Group offices, where Margaret maintained a symbolic role as chairman emeritus. "Mrs. Morrison, I think you should know that the office is in chaos. Mr. Marcus has locked himself in his office. His business partners are demanding an emergency meeting. There are lawyers arriving. And someone called the press. There are reporters in the lobby." Margaret closed her eyes briefly. Then her expression hardened with resolve. "Thank you for letting me know. I'll be there within the hour." She looked at Victoria after hanging up. "I need to go to the office. The business partners deserve answers about the financial irregularities. This is going to become very public very quickly. Do you want me to come with you?" "No. You stay here, where it's safe. Let Hoffman and me handle the immediate fallout. Your job right now is to protect yourself and prepare for what comes next." After Margaret left, Victoria sat in the quiet brownstone and tried to process what was happening. Somewhere across town, Marcus's carefully constructed empire was beginning to crumble. His colleagues and partners were discovering the truth about his affairs and his financial crimes. His reputation built over 15 years of aggressive deal-making and calculated charm, was dissolving in real time. She should feel triumphant, vindicated. Instead, she felt oddly hollow. This man had been her husband. She'd loved him, or thought she had. She'd built a life around him, had trusted him with her future, her heart, her faith in partnership and commitment, and he'd destroyed all of it. For what? For excitement? For variety? For the ego boost of having multiple women dependent on him? Her phone rang again. This time, a number she recognized. Sarah Brennan, one of her closest friends from the charity circuit. Victoria answered. Sarah. Victoria, oh my God, what's happening? I just saw on the news that Marcus was served with divorce papers at his office this morning. They're saying something about frozen assets and financial fraud. Are you okay? News. It had hit the news already. Victoria felt her stomach clench. I'm fine. Marcus and I are getting divorced. The rest is complicated. Where are you? Do you need anything? I can come over, or we can meet somewhere. I appreciate that, but I need some space right now. I'll call you soon, I promise. After she hung up, Victoria turned on the television to a local news channel. Sure enough, there was a reporter standing outside the Morrison Development Group building, talking into a camera. Breaking news this morning as prominent real estate developer Marcus Morrison was served with divorce papers at his office, along with a restraining order freezing his assets pending investigation into alleged financial irregularities. Sources say Morrison's wife of 2 years, Victoria Morrison, has filed for divorce on grounds of adultery and is seeking half of all marital assets under the terms of their prenuptial agreement. Morrison's business partners have declined to comment, but sources within the company suggest there may be evidence of investor fraud and misappropriation of funds. We'll continue to follow this developing story throughout the day. Victoria turned off the television, her hands shaking slightly. This was real now, public, irreversible. Her phone continued to ring with calls from friends, acquaintances, people she barely knew, all wanting details, wanting to express shock or support or thinly veiled curiosity. She stopped answering altogether, turned the ringer off, tried to find some quiet in the chaos. Around noon, Margaret called. I'm at the office. It's worse than I thought. The business partners have demanded a full audit. They're talking about removing Marcus from operational control of the company. And Victoria, there's something else. One of Marcus's mistresses showed up. Jessica. She's pregnant, and she's threatening to sue him for fraud and breach of promise. Apparently, he'd been telling her he was going to marry her once the divorce was finalized. She found out about the other women, and she's furious. Victoria felt a bitter laugh escape. Of course she is. The press is having a field day. You should prepare yourself. They're going to dig into every aspect of your life, your marriage, everything. Do you want me to hire a public relations firm to help manage the narrative? Not yet. Let them dig. Let them find out exactly what kind of man Marcus is. The truth is, on my side. All right, I'm staying here to meet with the partners and try to contain the damage to the company. Call me if you need anything. The afternoon passed in a surreal haze. Victoria tried to work on her business plan for Hartley Designs, but couldn't focus. She tried to read, but the words blurred together. Finally, she gave up and went for a walk, needing to move, to breathe, to feel something other than the strange numbness that had settled over her. She walked through Central Park, anonymous in sunglasses and a baseball cap, watching couples stroll hand in hand, families picnic on the grass, children chase pigeons with gleeful abandon. Normal life continuing all around her while her own life imploded. It felt disorienting, this contrast between her private catastrophe and the world's indifference. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her look. Mrs. Morrison, this is Robert Chen. I wanted to update you on my findings. I've spent the past 2 days doing a preliminary analysis of the files you provided. The fraud is extensive. I'm estimating your husband has misappropriated approximately $8 to $10 million from investor funds over the past 18 months. I've prepared a referral to the district attorney's office. They should be opening a criminal investigation within the next 48 hours. I'll keep you updated. $8 to $10 million. The number was staggering. Victoria had known it was bad, but seeing it quantified made it real in a way that reviewing spreadsheets hadn't. Marcus had stolen millions from people who'd trusted him, had used that money to maintain his network of affairs and hidden properties. He hadn't just betrayed her, he'd betrayed everyone who'd believed in him. By evening, the story had spread beyond local news to national outlets. Victoria's phone filled with interview requests from journalists, producers wanting her to appear on talk shows, book agents suggesting she write a memoir. She ignored them all. This wasn't entertainment. This was her life, her pain, her journey toward something resembling recovery. Margaret returned to the brownstone around 7, looking exhausted but grimly satisfied. The partners voted unanimously to suspend Marcus from all operational duties pending the outcome of the investigation. His access to company accounts has been revoked. They're talking about civil suits to recover the stolen funds. How did he take it? I wasn't there for that conversation, but I'm told he destroyed his office, threw his computer monitor through the window, overturned furniture, screamed at everyone in range. Security had to escort him from the building. Victoria tried to summon sympathy and found none. Good. They ordered dinner from a nearby Italian restaurant, neither of them having the energy to cook. Over pasta and wine, Margaret told her about the emergency board meeting, the lawyers descending on the office like vultures. The reporters camped outside hoping for statements. One of the reporters asked me if I supported my son or my daughter-in-law, Margaret said, twirling linguine around her fork. I told them I supported honesty and integrity, and that Marcus had demonstrated neither. You should have seen their faces. They weren't expecting the mother to side against her own child. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Because it's the truth. And because someone needs to make it clear that this family doesn't condone fraud or infidelity or the systematic abuse of trust. Marcus made his choices. Now he lives with the consequences. That night, lying in bed, Victoria finally allowed herself to cry. Not gentle tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from the core of her being. She cried for the marriage that had never been what she thought it was. She cried for the trust that had been broken, the future that had been stolen, the innocence she could never get back. She cried for the woman she'd been, who'd believed in love and partnership and the possibility of building something lasting. When the tears finally subsided, she felt emptied out, but also clearer somehow, lighter, like she'd released something toxic that had been poisoning her from the inside. She got out of bed, washed her face, looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, red eyes, blotchy skin, hair a mess. But beneath the evidence of crying, she saw something else: strength, determination, survival. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings and media coverage. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation into Marcus's business dealings. His investors filed a class action lawsuit. Jessica, the pregnant mistress, filed her own suit for fraud and emotional distress. The other mistresses, once they learned about each other, came forward with their own stories. The media ate it up, turning Marcus into a cautionary tale about greed and arrogance and the consequences of treating people as disposable. Victoria maintained a dignified silence through it all. She didn't give interviews, didn't make statements, didn't engage with the circus unfolding around her. She let her lawyers speak for her, let the evidence speak for itself. Instead, she focused on building something new. She registered Hartley Designs as an LLC, rented a small office space in the Flatiron District, hired a recent graduate from Parsons School of Design as her first employee. Margaret made good on her promise to provide introductions, And Victoria found herself meeting with wealthy families interested in renovating brownstones, updating penthouses, transforming vacation homes into showcases. Her first major project came from an unexpected source. One of Marcus's former business partners, a developer named Thomas Ashford, approached her with a proposition. He'd acquired a historic hotel in Brooklyn that needed complete renovation, and he wanted someone with vision to handle the interior design. "I know this might be awkward," Thomas said when they met at a coffee shop in Park Slope, "given everything that's happening with Marcus, but I've seen your portfolio, and I've heard from Margaret about your talent and work ethic. I need someone who can transform this property into something special. Are you interested?" Victoria looked at the plans he spread across the table. A 6-story building from 1923. Beautiful bones, but decades of neglect. It would be an enormous undertaking, months of work, a budget in the millions. It would also be exactly the kind of high-profile project that could establish her firm as serious and capable. "I'm very interested," she said. They spent 2 hours discussing his vision, her ideas, the timeline, and budget. By the time they finished, Victoria had her first major contract, $2.4 million for complete interior design and renovation of the Parkside Hotel. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised her. 16-hour days became normal. She sketched designs, sourced materials, met with contractors, oversaw every detail personally. The work was exhausting, but also deeply satisfying. She was building something real, creating something beautiful, using skills she'd almost forgotten she possessed. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against Marcus ground forward with inexorable momentum. The district attorney's office built their case methodically, interviewing investors, examining financial records, tracing the flow of money through shell companies and offshore accounts. The evidence was overwhelming. In late August, exactly 2 months after Victoria had served him with divorce papers, Marcus was indicted on 14 counts including wire fraud, money laundering, securities fraud, and theft by conversion. The arraignment was a media spectacle. Victoria didn't attend, but she watched the news coverage from her new office. Marcus, in an expensive suit that couldn't hide how much weight he'd lost, pleading not guilty to all charges. His lawyer, a high-priced defense attorney named Jonathan Reeves, making statements about how his client was innocent, how this was a witch hunt motivated by a vindictive ex-wife. Hoffman called her immediately after. "Don't let that garbage get to you. Reeves is desperate. The evidence against Marcus is airtight. This is just posturing for the press." "I know. It still feels surreal, though. Watching the man I married being led into a courthouse in handcuffs. He did this to himself, Victoria. Every choice that led to this moment was his choice. You're just the one who had the courage to hold him accountable." The divorce proceedings moved in parallel with the criminal case. Marcus's lawyers tried every tactic to delay, to negotiate, to reduce the settlement Victoria was entitled to under the prenuptial agreement. But with the criminal charges pending and Margaret testifying to the extent of Marcus's deception, the judge had little patience for stalling tactics. In September, 3 months after Victoria had pushed her husband into a lake, she sat in a courtroom and listened to the judge read the terms of her divorce settlement. $16 million in liquid assets and property, including the brownstone she and Marcus had shared, and 2 investment properties in Manhattan. Alimony of $35,000 per month for 12 months, paid from a trust established before Marcus's other assets were frozen. Full dissolution of the marriage, effective immediately. She signed the papers with steady hands, barely glancing at Marcus across the courtroom. He looked diminished somehow, smaller than he'd been. His lawyer had advised him to accept the settlement rather than fight it, to minimize the damage and preserve what assets he could for his criminal defense. He'd agreed, because he had no choice. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Victoria ignored them, climbing into the car Margaret had sent for her. As they pulled away from the curb, she looked back at the courthouse steps where Marcus stood with his lawyers, looking lost and bewildered. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no sadness. Just a vast sense of relief that this chapter was finally, officially closed. The criminal trial was scheduled for November. The district attorney's office had built an airtight case with testimony from investors, forensic accounting reports from Robert Chen, evidence of the systematic fraud Marcus had perpetrated. His defense was weak, relying mostly on claims that he'd intended to pay back the money, that it was borrowing rather than theft, that the charges were overblown. Victoria attended the trial every day, sitting in the gallery with Margaret beside her. She listened to investor after investor describe how they'd trusted Marcus, how he'd promised them returns on their investments, how he'd diverted their money into his personal ventures. She listened to Robert Chen explain in painstaking detail the network of shell companies and offshore accounts, the millions of dollars that had disappeared from legitimate business operations. And she listened when Margaret took the stand, her mother-in-law's voice steady and clear, as she testified about her son's character, his pattern of deception, his willingness to betray anyone who stood in the way of what he wanted. The courtroom was silent as Margaret spoke, everyone understanding the weight of a mother testifying against her own child. "Do you believe your son is guilty of the crimes he's accused of?" the prosecutor asked. Margaret looked directly at Marcus, her expression sorrowful but resolute. "Yes, I believe he committed fraud. I believe he stole from people who trusted him. And I believe he needs to face the consequences of those actions. Not because I don't love him, but because I do. Because sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's self-destruction." The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all 14 counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Catherine Wu, looked at Marcus with something like contempt as she delivered her ruling. "Mr. Morrison, you have been found guilty of defrauding investors of over $8 million, money that you used to fund a lifestyle of infidelity and deception. You betrayed the trust of your business partners, your investors, and your family. You showed no remorse, no acceptance of responsibility, no understanding of the harm you caused to others. This court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to your victims in the amount of $8.2 million, plus interest and legal fees. May you use your time in prison to reflect on the choices that brought you here." Victoria sat in the courtroom and watched as Marcus was led away in handcuffs. He didn't look at her, didn't look at Margaret, didn't look at anyone. His shoulders were hunched, his face blank with shock. 8 years. He'd be 50 when he got out, assuming he served the full sentence. His empire destroyed, his reputation in ruins, his freedom gone. She waited for the satisfaction to come, the sense of vindication, the feeling that justice had been served. Instead, she felt only a deep weariness and a desire to move forward, to leave this entire nightmare behind. 2 years passed like water flowing around stones in a river, reshaping the landscape of Victoria's life in ways both subtle and profound. The media frenzy surrounding Marcus's trial eventually faded, replaced by newer scandals and fresher tragedies. The reporters stopped calling. The curious acquaintances stopped asking probing questions disguised as concern. Victoria Morrison became simply Victoria Hartley again. And in that reclaimed name, she found a freedom she hadn't known she'd been missing. Hartley Designs occupied a converted loft space in the Flatiron district now, 3 times larger than the cramped office she'd started with. Large windows flooded the space with natural light, illuminating drafting tables and fabric samples and mood boards in various stages of completion. What had begun as a one-woman operation with a single employee had grown into a team of 8 talented designers, each one carefully selected for their creativity, their work ethic, and their ability to understand that design was about more than aesthetics. It was about creating spaces where people could live their fullest lives. The Parkside Hotel project had been completed 6 months after the divorce was finalized, and the results exceeded even Victoria's ambitious vision. She'd transformed the tired 1920s building into a boutique hotel that honored its historic character while incorporating modern luxury. Art Deco details meticulously restored, original moldings preserved and highlighted, but with contemporary furnishings and state-of-the-art amenities seamlessly integrated. The hotel had been featured in Architectural Digest, Interior Design Magazine, and the New York Times Style section. Reservations were booked solid for the next year. That success had led to others. A penthouse renovation for a hedge fund manager and his wife. A complete redesign of a century-old townhouse in the West Village. A corporate headquarters for a tech startup that wanted their office to feel creative and energizing rather than sterile and corporate. Each project built her reputation, expanded her portfolio, demonstrated her range and vision. On a crisp October morning, almost exactly 3 years since that gallery opening where she'd met Marcus, Victoria stood in her office reviewing proposals for a new project when her assistant, Amy Chen, a bright 26-year-old with impeccable taste and boundless energy, knocked on her door. "Victoria, you have visitors. Margaret Morrison and someone named James Whitmore. He says he's from Business Quarterly magazine." Victoria looked up, surprised. She hadn't been expecting Margaret, though her former mother-in-law remained one of her closest friends and most loyal supporters. They had lunch together every few weeks, Margaret serving as both mentor and confidant as Victoria navigated the challenges of running her own business. "Send them in, please." Margaret entered first, elegant as always in a camel cashmere coat and silk scarf, her silver hair perfectly styled. Behind her came a man in his early 40s, tall and lean with dark hair graying slightly at the temples, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and carrying a worn leather messenger bag. He had an air of quiet intelligence about him, the kind of person who observed more than he spoke. "Victoria, darling," Margaret said, kissing her cheek. "I hope you don't mind the surprise visit. James has been working on a feature about women entrepreneurs who've overcome adversity, and I told him he absolutely had to include you." James Whitmore extended his hand with a warm smile. "Mrs. Hartley, it's a pleasure. I promise I'm not here to dredge up the past or sensationalize your divorce. I'm interested in your story as a business owner, how you built Hartley Designs from nothing into one of the most sought-after interior design firms in the city." Victoria shook his hand, assessing him with the same careful eye she used to evaluate potential clients. His grip was firm, but not aggressive, his gaze direct, but respectful. "I appreciate that, Mr. Whitmore, though I'm not sure my story is particularly remarkable. I started a business, worked hard, and got fortunate with some excellent opportunities." "That's not how I heard it," James said, pulling out a notebook. "I heard you launched your firm while going through one of the most publicized divorces in New York, secured a $2.4 million contract for your first major project, and have since grown to annual revenues exceeding $5 million. That sounds pretty remarkable to me." Margaret settled into one of the leather chairs across from Victoria's desk. "James has already interviewed several other women for the piece. A tech founder who started her company after being forced out of the one she co-founded. A restaurant owner who rebuilt after a devastating fire. He's focusing on resilience and reinvention." "Those sound like much more compelling stories than mine," Victoria said, but she was intrigued despite herself. "Why don't we let your clients decide?" James suggested. "I've been doing background research, and I spoke with Thomas Ashford about the Parkside Hotel project. He said you were the most professional, creative, and dedicated designer he'd ever worked with. He also said you saved his investment by coming in under budget and ahead of schedule, which apparently never happens in renovation projects." Victoria felt herself smile. "Thomas was generous to take a chance on me when my firm was barely established. That project meant everything to my business. He said you personally worked 16-hour days for months, that you were on-site supervising contractors, solving problems in real time, refusing to compromise on quality even when it would have been easier. That kind of dedication is worth writing about. They talked for over an hour, James asking thoughtful questions about her design philosophy, her business model, the challenges of breaking into a competitive industry. He didn't ask about Marcus, didn't pry into the divorce or the trial or the scandal that had consumed her life 3 years ago. He was interested in who she'd become, not who she'd been married to. When he finally left, promising to send her the article before publication, Margaret remained behind. "He's single, you know," Margaret said with studied casualness, examining her manicured nails. "Margaret, I'm just saying. He's intelligent, successful, respectful. And the way he looked at you when you were explaining your vision for sustainable luxury design, that was the look of a man who's interested in more than just a professional interview. I'm not looking for a relationship. I'm focused on my business. Victoria, darling, it's been 3 years. You've built an incredibly successful company. You've proven to yourself and everyone else that you don't need a man to define you or support you. But that doesn't mean you have to be alone forever. You're 38 years old. You're allowed to be happy. You're allowed to trust again." Victoria stood and walked to the window, looking out over the street below where people hurried past with coffee cups and briefcases, everyone absorbed in their own private dramas. "I'm not sure I know how to trust like that anymore. Marcus broke something in me, Margaret. Some fundamental belief that people mean what they say, that love is real and lasting, that commitment means something. I don't know if I can get that back." Margaret joined her at the window, slipping an arm around her waist. "That's the thing about being broken, dear. When you put yourself back together, you get to decide what shape to take. You don't have to be the same person you were before. You can be someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who knows her own worth and won't settle for anything less than she deserves." They stood together in silence for a moment before Margaret spoke again. "By the way, I received a letter from Marcus last week, from prison." Victoria felt her stomach tighten. What did he want? Forgiveness, apparently. He's been in therapy, mandatory as part of his incarceration. He wanted me to know he understands now what he did, how much damage he caused. He asked me to tell you he's sorry. And what did you say? I haven't responded. I'm not sure I will. Some apologies come too late to matter, and some damage can't be undone by saying sorry. But I thought you should know, in case you wanted to, I don't know, find some closure in it. Victoria turned away from the window. I found my closure 3 years ago when I pushed him into that lake. Everything after that was just legal formalities and consequences. I don't need his apology, Margaret. I don't need anything from him except for him to stay out of my life. Good. That's healthy. That's moving forward. After Margaret left, Victoria tried to focus on work, but found her mind wandering to James Whitmore and his thoughtful questions, his genuine interest in her success rather than her scandal. She pulled up his articles online, reading several pieces he'd written for Business Quarterly. They were well-crafted, insightful, focused on the human stories behind business success and failure. He wrote with empathy and intelligence, qualities she'd learned to value highly. 3 days later, the article arrived in her email inbox for review. She read it twice, once quickly and once slowly, savoring the way James had captured not just the facts of her business, but the philosophy behind it. He'd written about her belief that interior design should serve the people living in the space, not just look beautiful in photographs. He'd quoted her saying that a home should tell the story of the people who inhabited it, should reflect their values and dreams, and the life they wanted to live. Near the end of the article, he'd written, Victoria Hartley represents a particular kind of American success story, the phoenix rising from ashes. After a devastating betrayal that would have destroyed lesser spirits, she chose to rebuild rather than retreat. She took pain, and transformed it into purpose, took broken trust and rebuilt it into a thriving business built on integrity and excellence. In a culture that often celebrates the loud and flashy, Hartley Designs offers something different: quiet confidence, meticulous craftsmanship, and a belief that beauty should serve life, not the other way around. Victoria found herself blinking back tears. No one had ever described her or her work quite that way before. She typed out a response. "Thank you for capturing the essence of what I'm trying to build. Your article is beautiful and more generous than I deserve. I appreciate your thoughtfulness and your talent." His response came 30 minutes later. "The article only reflects what's already there. Your work speaks for itself. I wondered if you might be willing to grab coffee sometime. I'd love to hear more about your upcoming projects. Purely professional curiosity, of course. Though I'd be lying if I said that was the only reason I'm asking." Victoria stared at the message for a long time. 3 years ago, she would have immediately declined, would have protected herself behind walls of professionalism and caution, but Margaret's words echoed in her mind. "You're allowed to be happy. You're allowed to trust again." She typed slowly. "Coffee sounds nice. There's a place near my office that makes an excellent cappuccino. How's Thursday afternoon?" They met at a small cafe in the Flatiron district, one of those places with exposed brick and mismatched vintage furniture that managed to be charming rather than pretentious. James arrived exactly on time, which Victoria appreciated, carrying his worn messenger bag and wearing a navy sweater that brought out the blue in his eyes. "Thank you for saying yes," he said, as they settled at a corner table with their coffee. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," Victoria admitted. "I'm not particularly good at this anymore. Dating, I mean, if that's what this is. We can call it whatever you're comfortable with. Two professionals discussing design philosophy over coffee, or two people getting to know each other, or the beginning of something that might become something more. No pressure." They talked for 2 hours, the conversation flowing easily from work to books to travel to the 1,000 small things that make up a life. James was a cultural journalist by training, had spent 5 years covering arts and music before transitioning to business writing. He was divorced himself, no children, a marriage that had ended amicably after they'd both realized they'd grown into different people than they'd been when they married. "It was sad, but not bitter," he explained. "We wanted different things, different futures. Sometimes that's enough reason to part ways. No betrayal, no drama, just honest acknowledgement that the path we'd started on together had diverged into 2 separate paths." Victoria envied that kind of ending, that mature ability to recognize incompatibility without cruelty or deception. "My marriage ended differently, but I'm sure you already know that. I know what's been reported. I don't presume to know what you experienced personally. If you want to talk about it, I'm happy to listen. If you don't, that's fine too. Your past is your business." She found herself telling him anyway. Not the whole story, but the important parts. The lake house, the discovery, the divorce, and trial and rebuilding. He listened without interrupting, without judgment, his attention focused entirely on her. "That took enormous courage," he said when she finished. "To not just walk away, but to hold him accountable. To build something new while everything else was falling apart. I'm impressed. I didn't feel courageous. I felt angry and betrayed and determined not to let him destroy me. Sometimes courage looks like anger. Sometimes it looks like stubbornness. Sometimes it's just the refusal to give up, even when giving up would be easier." They met for coffee again the following week, then dinner. Then, a gallery opening James was covering for a piece on emerging artists. He introduced her to his world of cultural journalism and artistic communities, and she found herself drawn into conversations about creativity and expression and the ways art intersects with daily life. He was different from Marcus in fundamental ways. Where Marcus had been loud and commanding, James was quiet and observant. Where Marcus had demanded attention, James gave it. Where Marcus had been focused on conquest and acquisition, James was interested in understanding and connection. Being with James felt easy, comfortable, like stepping into a warm room after being out in the cold. 6 months after that first coffee, they were dating seriously. He'd met Margaret, who'd approved wholeheartedly, telling Victoria later that James was exactly what she needed. Someone secure enough in himself not to be threatened by her success, intelligent enough to be genuinely interesting, and kind enough to be trusted. "He looks at you like you're the most fascinating person in the room," Margaret observed over lunch one afternoon. "Marcus used to look at you like you were a particularly attractive accessory. There's a difference." Victoria knew Margaret was right. James celebrated her successes without trying to claim credit for them. He supported her ambitions without trying to shape them to his preferences. He was genuinely proud when Hartley Designs won the contract to design the interiors for a new commercial building, a $4 million project that would take 2 years and cement her firm's reputation as a major player in the industry. "This is incredible," James said when she told him about the contract, pulling her into a hug. "You've earned this. Your vision, your talent, your dedication. This is all you, Victoria. I'm so proud of you." She'd started to believe, carefully and cautiously, that maybe Margaret had been right. Maybe she was allowed to be happy again. Maybe trust wasn't something Marcus had permanently destroyed, but something she could choose to rebuild, piece by piece, with someone who'd earned it. A year after their first coffee, James proposed. Not with grand gestures or public displays, but on a quiet Sunday morning in her apartment, over breakfast and newspapers, in the kind of comfortable domestic intimacy they'd built together. "I know we haven't been together that long," he said, setting down his coffee cup, "and I know you have very good reasons to be cautious about marriage. But Victoria, I love you. I love your strength and your creativity and the way you've built something beautiful out of pain. I love how dedicated you are to your work and how much you care about creating spaces that make people's lives better. I love the way you think and the way you laugh and the way you face challenges head-on instead of running from them. I want to spend my life with you, not because I need you, but because I choose you. Every day, I choose you." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at this man who saw her so clearly, who valued her so completely. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I choose you too." They married 6 months later, in a small ceremony in Margaret's garden, just close friends and family. Victoria wore a simple cream dress, not white, and carried wildflowers instead of formal arrangements. James wore a navy suit and cried when she walked toward him, not caring who saw. Margaret officiated, her voice steady and warm as she spoke about love and partnership, and the courage it takes to trust again after being broken. "Marriage isn't about finding perfection," Margaret said, looking at both of them. "It's about finding someone who sees your imperfections and loves you anyway. Someone who celebrates your strengths and supports you through your weaknesses. Someone who chooses you, not just once at an altar, but every day in 1,000 small ways." Victoria looked at James and saw her future. Not a fairy tale, not a fantasy, but something real and solid and built on honesty. He smiled at her, his eyes bright with tears and love and promise, and she smiled back. The reception was held in Margaret's brownstone, intimate and joyful. Thomas Ashford was there, along with other clients who'd become friends. Amy and the rest of Victoria's team from Hartley Designs, James's colleagues from Business Quarterly, people who'd supported her rebuilding, who'd celebrated her successes, who genuinely wanted her to be happy. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Margaret pulled Victoria aside. "I have something to tell you," she said quietly. "Marcus's parole hearing was denied last week. He'll serve at least another 2 years, possibly 3. Victoria felt nothing at the news. No satisfaction, no anger, no residual pain. Marcus had become irrelevant to her life, a character in a story that had ended years ago. "How do you feel about that?" Relieved, honestly. I think he needs more time to genuinely understand what he did and why. Prison isn't just punishment. It's supposed to be rehabilitation. He's not ready to rejoin society yet. Maybe in another few years. Maybe, Victoria agreed. Then, looking around at the people gathered in Margaret's home, at James talking with Thomas Ashford, at her team laughing together, at the life she'd built from the ruins of betrayal, she added, "But honestly, Margaret, I don't think about him anymore. He's the past. This, all of this, is my present and my future." Margaret hugged her tightly. "That's exactly as it should be. You've won, Victoria. Not just the divorce or the business success, but something bigger. You've won your life back. You've become exactly who you were meant to be." Later that night, in the hotel where she and James would spend their wedding night, before leaving for a honeymoon in Italy, Victoria stood at the window looking out over the city lights. James came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About how 3 years ago I drove up to a lake house with lobster tails and truffle mashed potatoes, thinking I was going to surprise my husband with a romantic gesture. Instead, I discovered he'd been lying to me for months. And in that moment, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. And now?" She turned to face him, placing her hands on his chest. "Now I know that wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The beginning of understanding my own strength, my own worth, my own capability. I built a business I'm proud of. I have relationships based on honesty and respect. I have you, someone who sees me completely and loves me anyway. That woman who drove to the lake house with her perfect meal and her lingerie, she was trying so hard to be what someone else wanted that she'd forgotten who she was. I'm glad she's gone. I'm glad you found yourself," James said, kissing her forehead. "Though I have to say, I'm a little sorry I never got to taste those lobster tails." Victoria laughed, the sound light and free. "I'll make them for you someday, but they won't be perfect, and I won't apologize for that, because perfect isn't real. Real is messy and complicated and sometimes broken. But real can be rebuilt into something even better than perfect. Real can be beautiful in ways that perfect never is." That's very philosophical for someone on her wedding night. "I'm a woman of depth and substance," she said, smiling. "That's one of the many reasons I love you." They stood together at the window, watching the city pulse with life below them. Two people who'd been broken in different ways and had chosen to rebuild stronger. Victoria thought about the journey that had brought her here, from devastation to reconstruction, to this moment of genuine happiness. It hadn't been easy. There had been tears and setbacks and moments when she'd wondered if she'd ever feel whole again. But she'd persevered. She'd built Hartley Designs into a thriving business, with annual revenues exceeding $6 million. She'd created a team of talented designers who shared her vision. She'd proven to herself and everyone else that she was more than just Marcus Morrison's wife, more than just a scandal, more than just a woman who'd been betrayed. She was Victoria Hartley, designer, entrepreneur, survivor, fighter, wife to a man who valued her, friend to people who supported her, owner of a life she'd built with her own hands from the ruins of what had been destroyed. And when she finally turned away from the window, turning toward James and the future they'd build together, she left behind the last shadow of the past. Marcus Morrison and his betrayals, his lies, his prison sentence, his destroyed empire, all of it belonged to someone else's story now. Victoria's story was just beginning, and it would be written on her own terms, in her own words, with her own vision guiding every choice. She'd decided to surprise her billionaire husband on his fishing trip. When she arrived, she'd discovered the truth that would destroy her marriage. But from that destruction, she'd built something infinitely more valuable than what she'd lost. She'd built herself. And that Victoria thought as James took her hand and led her away from the window toward their future together, was the best revenge of all. Not his downfall, but her rise. Not his punishment, but her success. Not his regret, but her complete and utter indifference to whether he regretted anything at all. She'd won, not just in the divorce court or the criminal trial, but in the life she'd created afterward. And unlike Marcus, sitting in a prison cell with 3 more years until even the possibility of parole, Victoria was free. Free to love, free to build, free to become whoever she wanted to be. The woman who'd driven to the lake house 3 years ago had thought she was surprising her husband. Instead, she'd surprised herself by discovering just how strong she could be. And in the end, that had made all the difference. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.